I call the Town of Rome Board budget meeting to order. It is Tuesday, September 29th, 2020, and it is 3:02 p.m. First order of business, item 1 is called to order. We are now in order. Item 2 is roll call, starting with my far left.
Weishner here.
Iverson here.
Johnson here.
All right here.
Note for the record that Supervisor Waddle is excused. He may come in a little bit later in the meeting if possible. Amy, could you certify the posting meeting, please?
I certify that on Friday, September 25th, 2020, the agenda for the Town of Rome Board budget meeting for Tuesday, September 29th, 2020 was emailed to the Wisconsin Rapids Tribune at 3:49 p.m., posted at Rome Town Hall at 3:45 p.m., at Crystal's Trading Post at 4:05 p.m., and the Coosa Fort Everett State Bank at 4 p.m.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, item 4, is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion on approval of the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Item 5 is citizen comments. We have not received any requests to address the board, so I will dispense with reading the requirements for that section of the meeting. Moving on to discussion and possible action on the following items. Item 6, discussion and action, review of financial management and investment plan prepared by Ellers with Greg Johnson and Tammy Olszewski. Jamie, if you would introduce our guests, and we'll proceed with this part of the agenda.
We'll have Greg come up here so he can use the mic, and I'll put up his PowerPoint. You guys are all very familiar with Greg Johnson. Been a real asset to the town and helped us through a lot of items, and we have been talking about a financial management plan, and that's what he will be presenting today. And then if you just enter where the arrows will work.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Jamie, for the kind introduction. As Jamie mentioned, I'm here to talk through the financial management plan that we've been developing with town staff. I'm here to kind of present the initial draft of that to you for further discussion this evening. I'm just going to start by kind of outlining the objectives in terms of why we think it's beneficial to go through this process and what we can expect this afternoon in terms of how this tool can be utilized. Really the benefits of undertaking this process, we feel, is that it really helps you as a governing board, a governing body, to help continue to set long-term financial goals and strategies. As we go through this financial management plan, really what it is a multi-year projection of the town's operating needs and your capital budget, and integrates it all into one comprehensive financial model. So you can see long-term how your tax levy is trending for operations, for any capital items that you're funding through your budget, with cash or accumulated funds, and then if you have to issue any debt, we've included the impact of that as well. So it's really a way to kind of take a multi-year look at your financial condition, your service delivery, how that impacts the town's budget long-term. This doesn't replace your annual budget process that you're certainly going through. We feel it helps enhance it by looking at long-term trends. It can help influence decisions that you're making for your 2021 budget. And by really integrating the operational capital and any debt needs into one model, you can see the whole picture. We feel that's what really helps lead to some better decision making and can help with your annual budget process going forward. So that's kind of an overview of the objectives and the purpose behind why we go through this exercise. So just some comments on the town's current financial position and your policies. Earlier this year, the town got its first rating from Moody's Investor Services that came back at a AA3 rating, which is a very strong rating. The rating scale goes from AAA to AA1, AA2, to AA3. Some of the credit strengths that Moody's identified are your very strong value, equalized value on a per capita basis, very strong financial position, which is really driven by the town's strong fund balance, your overall liquidity, and just strong budget management over the years. So that's a nice independent validation of a lot of the good things that the town has been doing for several years. One of the things that you've done as a board and staff has done with you is really have a good policy of setting aside money for capital purchases. So one of your routine equipment and vehicles, you budget, accumulate funds for that purpose to reduce the amount that you're borrowing. We think that's a great strategy. We certainly recommend you continue that. We have suggestions on how you can maybe enhance or improve the accounting of that particular practice. But one of the items I'm going to talk about as well is that under levy limits, municipalities in Wisconsin have been under levy limits since 2005. Cash financing for capital is becoming more challenging because any levy for operations and capital is subject to the levy limits, which are based on net new construction. Really the only meaningful way you can increase your levy beyond that is to pay for your existing debt service or any new debt service. So we're certainly going to look at trying to maintain that practice, but we're going to talk about kind of some levy limit challenges and some solutions to particularly address that. Several policies and procedures that the town has documented as well. We're going to talk specifically about your fund balance policy and how that has been trending over the years. So we'll kind of get into fund balance. This chart is really just a description of how the Governmental Accounting Standard Board, or GASB, breaks down different types of fund balance. So there's kind of non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. So really when we're looking at your overall fund balance, the main category we're focusing on is your unassigned fund balance. That's really kind of your rainy day fund. It's money that you have set aside and really be used for working capital to help manage cash flow throughout the year and provide you with some money for emergencies or unforeseen circumstances. So it's always important to have a strong fund balance just because local government operations are continuous, ongoing. Certainly this year's had its own set of challenges, and that's why having a fund balance is a good practice. So this is just kind of a description of all the categories that are typically found in your audited financial statements.
And I apologize, the presentation that was in your mailboxes is a little bit cleaner because this is an older laptop that we're using. Since we have so much technology, it eschews it just a little bit.
So in terms of your the town's current fund balance policy, that states that the unassigned fund balance should be at least 17% of the current year's approved budget. So we included a chart from 2014 through 2019, your audited financial statements that just kind of show the components of your fund balance. The blue is really the main area we're focusing on with your policy, that's your unassigned fund balance, and you can see that you have consistently trended well above kind of that minimum 17% that's identified in your fund balance policy. So when I was mentioning at Moody's, they really referred to your strong financial condition. This is the exact same chart that we showed them as well, and it was one of the things that they commented on that really shows that the town is a very good and stable financial condition because you maintain a healthy fund balance over the years. So that's, so all your credit that's been able to be maintained consistently over the years. It really reflects very favorably on the town's financial condition. So just some other trends and information for you in terms of your overall equalized value. This goes back to 2015 and all the way to 2020. Equalized value numbers are certified by the Department of Revenue every year in August. Equalized value really is kind of your market value, your equalized value, assessed value. Equalized is kind of your market value. So we show, kind of the TID out and the TID in numbers. So the TID in orange, that's all of the property value within the town, including the increment value in TID District number 1. And then the blue is the TID out number, which when we look at kind of the tax rate projections long term, we're really focusing on that TID out number because you don't get the benefit of any increment value until the TID closes. And I'll also speak to kind of what that could look like as well. But this shows a nice steady trend. The town value has been steadily going up, and certainly in the last couple of years, we've seen some healthy increases in the overall TID value in particular. So again, another positive trend for the town moving forward. So now we're going to kind of talk about how we've developed the long-range financial model. This general fund forecasting bullets kind of identifies in a broad sense the methodology that we use, and we certainly vetted this with Jamie and Amy to get their inputs. Most of the town's non-levy revenue sources, all your, whether it's building and permits, and just some of your intergovernmental revenues, kind of everything other than the property tax levy. Don't see too much fluctuation in that from year to year. We've kind of projected that trend continuing going forward, so not too much variation from where your current revenue streams are at in that regard. As far as the expenditure methodology, for your 2021 budget, you're looking at about a 20% increase in your health insurance. We factor that into the budget to be consistent with what staff has done. And then we just forecasted that would increase 15% thereafter. You have some increases on the expenditure side in your solid waste budget, which are increasing significantly in 2021, and it will kind of continue over the next 3 years, kind of based on the 4-year plan that was developed by the county. Then we have your wages increasing about 2% per year, your service line items, a lot of your contractual items, at 2% per year as well, and then commodities, your general supply accounts, just kind of increasing at 1% per year. So we've done a forecast on a line item basis for every line item in every department that's within your general fund, kind of using this general methodology. Really our objective here through the financial management process is to take that line item detail and look at much broader trends to kind of see where things are going. So certainly in your budget discussion, you'll be focusing more on line items. We've done the projection based on the line items, but we like to focus on broader issues. So that's kind of where I'll be focusing my comments this afternoon. So one item that we are just kind of putting forth is kind of a suggestion for the town to consider going forward. As I mentioned, the town has a very good practice of budgeting for capital items to levy or build up cash, maybe for some of your routine capital equipment, for example. That all kind of runs through your general fund and kind of within individual departments within the general fund. Nothing wrong with that. One suggestion, though, that we want, we put forward for the town to consider going forward is considering creating a capital projects fund. This is pretty common amongst municipalities where that capital money is really set aside into its own fund. So it's kind of a little easier to track from an accounting standpoint. It's not commingled within your general fund and all your other operating revenues. And then if you do have any borrowed proceeds in the future, you can run those through the capital projects fund as well. So practically, it's doing what you're doing now. It just kind of adjusts the accounting for it and kind of runs it through its own separate fund, which we think from a management accounting standpoint will be a little bit easier to track that going forward. So it's not changing your practice. It's just changing potentially how it's accounted and how it shows up on your financial statements. Makes it a little bit easier for them to decipher between what's in your general fund operations and then where your capital is will just be identified in a separate fund. So it's, again, continuing the practice you're doing, just adjusting the accounting. So, as part of what we've done in this projection, we kind of, in 2021, everything is still allocated to your department. So we mimic the draft, the working draft of the 2021 budget. Items beyond 2022 to 2025, we show through that separate capital project fund. So still levying, it's just, again, that's being tracked kind of separately. And then some of your larger capital items that are in your 5-year capital improvement plan, notably fire trucks, larger purchase price acquisition, longer useful life. We're showing those are being financed through some debt issuance. And So all that can run through one fund, so again, it's kind of separate from the operating budget. So we're working with staff to kind of develop a kind of working draft of a 5-year capital improvement plan, which really identifies a lot of the items that the town typically budgets for on an annual basis. So we forecasted that out through 2027. So it shows, the asset that's being financed, a lot of equipment, vehicles, things of that nature. Then we included some allowances for the library, park, cemetery, building and grounds, and general government. Most of this, again, is identified as being funded through the tax levy. Some of the larger ticket items, mainly the fire trucks, we're showing will be financed with general obligation promissory notes for the term of 10 years. So this is just a project list that we've incorporated into the model, so into the capital project fund. This is kind of the years that things have been slotted. I think the town has had some capital lists over the years, which is a good practice. Kind of combining everything into one list and kind of having at least a 5-year plan. Looking ahead is kind of the minimum number of years that we recommend. Each year when you adopt your budget for that year, you can adopt the CIP for that first year of the plan, and then the remaining 4 years or greater are just kind of there as for planning reference. But this is a very good practice. So I think we encourage the town to continue this to help plan for capital items long term. If you have some larger ticket items, as we have on this list, you kind of keep a multi-year look. It's a lot easier to plan for those than if they just kind of come out in the course of the annual budget process. So this kind of just illustrates very simply kind of how that capital projects fund could work kind of on paper. So you have, your property tax levy, what's needed to kind of fund, and that can get, if money is not expended in 1 year, that can accumulate and carry forward. And then you just show any borrowed proceeds coming in to fund some of your larger items, and then your scheduled capital projects. So it's really similar to what you're doing within your general fund. It just puts it into a capital projects fund so it's clear what is designated each year on your financial statements. Because right now, when we look at like the financial statements for the town, it's all kind of commingled within your general fund. Again, you don't have to change it, but this is pretty common. You see a lot of communities that will separate out these capital projects funds because that's really set up for more long-term purchases over a multi-year period, whereas your general fund is really just covering your operating costs from year to year. So in terms of your existing debt payments, GO stands for general obligation debt. Most of the town's existing debt is general obligation debt. There's one loan outstanding that was issued as what's called revenue debt, which is paid by the water utility. We just kind of work my way across the spreadsheet from left to right. We have your total principal and interest payments in the first column, and then we identify the non-levy revenue sources that the town uses to pay for its debt service. So there's 2 years, or next year is the last year, the debt service outstanding for the principal project. They make payments annually to the town to cover 100% of their debt service. And then some of the general obligation debts attributable to the water utility. And then a significant portion is attributable to TIF District number 1. So we take your total gross principal and interest payments, apply the non-levy revenue sources, and we arrive at that net tax levy for debt service. So your levy in the 2020 budget was about $652,000 based on the town's existing debt profile. Your levy for debt service in 2021 is going to drop to $585,347. So kind of sees that your levy then will remain a little stable for the next few years and then drop again in 2025. All of the town's levy supported debt matures by 2029. So your debt levy is very stable. We're declining going forward, which is a very good position. So there were really 2 items in the capital plan we had identified that may make sense to consider financing in the future. There's really 2 fire truck acquisitions. And so we really show that those are financed in 2022 and 2024. So the first truck was about $690,000, the second one was $470,000. So everything on the far left-hand side is what I just summarized, which is existing debt service. And then we show the principal and interest payments added in if those fire trucks are financed in 2022 and 2024 respectively. We tried to structure the debt service payments so there wouldn't be that much of a change in your debt service levy going forward. So still have the decrease from 2020 to 2021. Then in 2023, there's about a $30,000 increase to the levy, but then it starts to stabilize going forward. So try to take advantage of some of those drops in your existing debt service levy, structure the debt service payments accordingly, so if we have some larger ticket capital items, those can be funded without a significant change to your debt service. So the other item we like to take a look at is your general obligation borrowing capacity. Under state law, you cannot have principal outstanding that exceeds 5% of the town's total equalized valuation. So at the end of this fiscal year, for example, the town will have about $14,650,000 of general obligation debt outstanding. That's 37% of your statutory limit. That leaves you about $25.2 million of borrowing capacity, which is very healthy. Then if we show those financing secured in the future for some of the fire truck equipment, you're really not seeing the utilization of your debt capacity go up significantly. It's going to continue to kind of decline and stabilize going forward. So what this really tells us is that if the town has to finance some larger capital items in the future, you have more than adequate borrowing capacity to do so. So you're in a very good position in terms of managing your debt going forward. Before I kind of segue into kind of the next part of the presentation, any questions so far? I'd like to get too far ahead. Okay. So I mentioned levy limits, so I want to spend some time kind of talking about that, kind of explaining and looking at some trends that we consider looking at going forward. So we took the working draft of the 2021 budget the staff has put together, and it shows that the maximum allowable levy that's allowed for the town for next year's budget, and when we compare that to the levy that we're projecting that's needed to fund the 2021 budget, there's a gap of about $178,000 there. So that's essentially the expenditures are about $178,000 higher than what the maximum allowable levy can support. So there's some items that are driving that. I mentioned that the changes in health insurance and solid waste are some notable contributing factors. But we're projecting that that levy limit gap is going to remain going forward through 2021 if these particular trends continue. So what does that mean from kind of a practical standpoint? So on the levy limit law, you can increase your levy from the prior year by the amount of net new construction. That's a percentage that the Department of Revenue publishes every August. And really your operating levy for your general fund and any capital that you're levying for are really subject to that net new construction cap. And so when I mentioned a lot of communities that have had to do the same thing that the town has done, which is great, which is levy for capital items, if they see that net new construction start to decline or just not increase at levels that it's been at historically, and if they see some of their operating costs going up, it's harder to fit in that capital levy as well, because the operating and capital levy are subject to that net new construction cap. So there are many adjustments or exceptions on the levy limit worksheet that can allow you to increase your levy above the net new construction. The one that's most commonly used across the state and has been used by the town is to increase your levy to cover general obligation debt service. So why is debt exempted from the levy law? One main reason is that general obligation debt Legally, that is debt that is issued, that the town is agreeing to levy an irrepealable tax to pay that debt service. Even debt that is paid by the water utility or the TIF district as general obligation debt, legally, it still carries that property tax levy pledge. The town hasn't had to levy for any TIF or utility supported debt, but if those revenues were insufficient, legally, the town is required to levy a debt service to cover those debt payments. So that's an important reason why debt is exempted from levy limits, because if it wasn't, that would cause some, concerns for municipalities all throughout Wisconsin, because that irrepealable tax levy pledge would no longer exist. So, what we see is that the operating costs are continuing to increase, as you're starting to kind of see here in the town, that capital levy, maintaining that becomes more of a challenge, because it has to fit, again, within that net construction. So one way communities can address this, and I'll talk more about how this works later, and I want to introduce the concept, is that they'll consider a short-term financing. Because again, the operations and capital kind of fall under that net reconstruction percentage. If the capital amounts can't be supported by the levy, if you do a short-term borrowing for that, not long-term, nothing that's outstanding for several years, but if you just did like a short-term note, that becomes debt service. Then you can add that to your debt service adjustment, and you can pay off the note as soon as you collect your property tax levy the next year. So it's kind of near cash financing. It's not, there's some modest interest exposure, interest costs that you're incurring, but you're not going from paying cash for something to financing it over 10 years. You're just financing it for a couple of months so you can increase your levy to pay for it. So I'll talk about that, how that works more in a few minutes. But I just want to kind of introduce that concept as a way of a strategy to adhere to what you've been doing, which is great, which is levying for as much of your capital as possible, but that's becoming hard under levy limits. So I don't want to give the impression that I think, if you're paying cash for something, you should do a short-term borrowing, that that's a better financial decision. It isn't. But under levy limits, it's becoming very difficult. It's a levy limit management strategy. We'll talk more on that in a few minutes. So this may be easier to look in your packet, but this is kind of the long-term forecast. So this is kind of really the crux of the analysis that brings everything together that both of you have been talking about up until this point. So as I mentioned, we did a forecast for all the line items in your budget. We took the 2021 budget and made those forecasts going forward out through 2025. So we have all your revenue sources coming in, and then we have all of your expenditures. Again, all of this done on a line item basis, but we kind of rolled everything up to kind of a big snapshot so we can see the trends. And then, as I mentioned, that capital projects fund, we show that kind of being in existence from 2022 going forward. So those items are kind of taken out of your general fund but are added into the capital projects fund. And then down below, you'll see where we kind of calculate that levy limit gap. So if we fund everything as we've identified it in the model, and we calculate and estimate what your maximum allowable levy would be under the levy limit law, we're projecting that gap. So that roughly $178,000 gap that I mentioned for 2021, there's still a gap that's not as high the following year, then drops, then starts to kind of come back up again. So what that means is that we need to look at some of these levy limit management strategies because we kind of have that gap. But then down below, if you did levy that full amount, we kind of show how your property tax levy is changing from year to year. So your total property tax levy for 2021 is just about $3.2 million, just a little less than what it was last year. Then we show it kind of goes to a little over 3.3, then about 3.4, 3.6, and then 3.8. It's a forecast. It's going to change. It again includes everything that was included in the capital plan. It's kind of an all-in scenario, continuation of your existing operating costs, but factoring in some increases, particularly in the areas of some of your health insurances. So to the extent that can be managed or adjusted, that's going to improve these numbers quite a bit. So again, I mean, we look at this as kind of a long-range tool. We kind of look at that all-in scenario to kind of see what does that look like. Understanding full well, we're going to go through the budget process, make changes to impact this model. But I think it's beneficial to kind of see how things would be impacted going forward, kind of using that 2021 budget as a guide. Any kind of questions on this, any of the numbers, anything you want to expand on?
How do you project out for something further out years, just some basic assumptions on inflation?
Yes, that was kind of some of the assumptions we used, like your health insurance increased about 15% per year, wages at about 2% per year, your kind of contractual items are about 2% per year, your supplies are about 1% per year, then the capital is tied back to that particular capital equipment replacement schedule, and then we're projecting some growth in your value as well. So it's kind of, we're doing projections for value and projections for revenues and costs as well. So we're trying to be conservative in terms on the expense side, and then on the revenue side, you know, we're not showing much growth in your non-levy revenue sources. Those are remaining pretty stable, as they have historically. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, one of the revenue sources, that includes the room tax, is that it?
Yeah, and the room tax kind of goes into a separate fund. So that can continue to increase, but wouldn't necessarily impact these two. Any other questions? We can come back then and this as you see fit. So just kind of looking at some trends kind of beyond the 2021 draft working budget, kind of looking at things beyond the next fiscal year. This kind of just shows the property tax levy broken down by the general fund, capital projects, existing debt service in gray, and then the new debt service for the fire trucks is shown in green. So it just kind of shows, how the levy is apportioned between those four areas. It just kind of shows kind of the general trend lines going forward. So as I mentioned on the debt, the two top colors, as your existing debt payments kind of go down, the new debt is kind of layered in. Your capital projects, we try to kind of maintain that consistent levy, and then your general fund budget just kind of gradually is kind of trending upward to kind of coincide with expenses. And so in terms of the tax levy, this is on an equalized basis. Again, looking beyond the next year's budget, just kind of shows how that tax rate is apportioned between the general fund, capital projects, existing debt service, and new debt service. So it just shows the rate per thousand of value, just in terms of how that is trending going forward, based on that methodology. This is a projection of the levy limit worksheet. I'm just going to highlight kind of a couple of items to kind of illustrate kind of the challenges and some of the strategies that we'll be talking about here. So on the upper half of the worksheet, you start with your prior year's actual levy. They take out any adjustment that you claim for debt the previous year, and then they apply your net new construction percentage to kind of determine your levy before adjustments. So your net new construction for the 2021 budget is about 1.81%. For the 2020 budget, that was at 2.383%. So your net new construction isn't as high this year, which is contributing to some of the levy limit calculation. Certainly, we projected net new construction at about 1.5% going forward. So we're trying to be fairly conservative to where it's been at the last 2 years. So that levy before adjustments, after the net new construction is applied, really there's a litany of adjustments that can be applied that are all listed in the statutes. But really the one that is most applicable to the town is you can increase your levy to cover debt service payments. So we recommend that that adjustment be no greater than what you're actually levying for debt service. All debt is exempt from levy limits, but some of your debt is paid by the utilities and the TIF district. So we don't want to include that in that number because you're not really levying for it. So we've shown your levy for debt service going forward that if you claim, the full amount that you're entitled to, that calculates what your total allowable levy would be. So we calculate what the allowable levy is, and then we compare that to the 5-year projection, and that was where we saw that, particular gap. I don't show a gap for 2021, that is, on this sheet, that is that 178,000. I had to kind of fill the worksheet out to how you would fill it out based on your maximum allowable levies, so the rest of the worksheet would work correctly. But that shows, again, that that levy limit gap is there in the order. So that really comes down to what are our strategies to manage that if that trend does continue moving forward. So there are generally broadly speaking, there are kind of 3 general ways that you can address your levy gap. So first is to make changes to your operating budget, increase some of your non-levy revenue sources. We want to talk about investments as an option, and then expenditures. Look at some of your expenditures. The health insurance is kind of the big hit for this year. Are there ways to manage that going forward? And are there just other ways to try to control some of the costs that are within your budget? So look at some increasing non-levy revenues, or trying to decrease some of your operating expenses. You can also do a levy limit referendum, where you can ask, the town electors to increase your levy either for a one-time purpose or ongoing to pay for specific costs. So all communities are allowed to do that under the statutes. Then the third option is to kind of do this short-term financing that I was talking about to give you some more flexibility from the levy limit standpoint. So you can look at all of these, or a combination of several, to really look at addressing levy limit challenges. But these are kind of the most common and probably where you get the most bang for the buck. So the levy limit referendum, just to explain what that is, the town board will be required to pass a resolution that specifies what the levy increase is for, whether it's one time, or it's ongoing, must state the purpose for what the levy is funding, whether it's something within the operating budget or capital, has to be specific. And then that resolution essentially goes to, it's in the form of a ballot question, it goes to the voters, they vote on it. So that's kind of the general process. That's becoming a little more common in the states, as you're seeing some levy limit pressures to go to the voters. So the other strategy is kind of this short-term debt strategy. And so as I mentioned, again, on the levy limit worksheet, the net new construction really applies to your operations and your capital levy. So again, great practice that you're levying for a lot of your equipment and vehicles to pay cash for those items. But again, there's no adjustment on the levy limit worksheet to increase your levy to cover those costs. The only real meaningful adjustment is for debt. So you could take some of those capital items, maybe some of your vehicles, some of your equipment, and you would issue a short-term note. And you could secure that note prior to adopting your budget for the next year. And so you would have a general obligation debt instrument. You can do it through a local bank. You could have the term of the note be a year, but have it be prepayable at any time. So you secure a debt obligation for those capital items. You can then claim the principal and interest amount as a levy limit adjustment on the worksheet to increase your allowable levy. So then you would approve your levy in November, and then as soon as you collect your property tax revenue the next fiscal year, you turn around and pay it off. So what does that mean from a numerical example? So this just an example. So say you have 3 squad cars, a plow truck, and a staff vehicle that were $385,000. So ideally, you would keep levying for that $385,000 and pay cash for it if you could on your levy limits. If you have a levy limit cap, a strategy is to execute a short-term financing for that $385,000. This uses a much higher rate than what we see in the market now. But if you borrowed at 2.5% and you paid that off within 90 days, so secure the note in November, you collect property taxes starting, December into January, you get into February, you have enough money for your property tax levy, you turn around and you pay that note off. If that note was outstanding for 90 days at 2.5%, you incur about $2,400 in interest costs. So not the same as levying for it with cash, but it's pretty darn close. You're just incurring some modest interest expense. But what that allows you to do is you can claim that full $387,406 on your levy limit worksheet. So you would have been levying for $385,000 of it anyways. But by shifting it to a short-term debt, you can increase your levy to cover it. And you have some modest interest costs, but, I guess in the looking at choices, if the choice is we can't cash finance some of these capital items in our operating budget under the levy limit cap, you have to make some cuts in your operating budget, but you could use this short-term financing strategy instead, instead of maybe $385,000, you're at $387,400. I guess the policy question is that a better trade versus maybe seeing some more significant cuts in your operating budget to get to your allowable levy. So it's a way of trying to stay as close to possible as what you're doing, but take a slightly different approach so you can get there on your levy. I want to make it perfectly clear. You can keep levying cash for these items and stay under the allowable levy, and you get no argument. Keep doing it. But if you start seeing some pressure on the operational side, it's a way to take some of the capital out of your operating budget, convert it to debt, but not have that debt be long-term, have some interest expense to turn around and pay it. So when I said year cash financing, in this example, the difference is $2,400. It's $2,400. But in the grand scheme of things, that might be a strategy to keep doing what you're doing on the capital side and make it work for you. Questions on that? It's kind of a concept, but hopefully this kind of illustrates how it works. Yeah, generally we wouldn't recommend that you borrow for operations. That's generally not something. That is correct. I mean, it's really, if you had these items in your budget using this $385,000, that has been built into your levy historically. So it's there now. It's just on this, going back to kind of this worksheet. Right now, that number is kind of built into this levy before adjustments number. And so it's subject to that monthly construction cap. By taking it out of that and shifting it to that short-term debt, it falls under this below-the-line adjustment, which allows you to increase your levy. So it's really just kind of taking something and kind of converting how you're paying for it to get to where you need to be in your levy.
It still will reflect in our tax base, because that number
Right.
will still be put in there, so.
Right. So it's still part of your levy. It just shows up in your budget as debt as opposed to built into your operating and capital. But you're still funding, you're still levying for it. You just have some little interest expense. But it will give you some more flexibility to handle some increases in your operational costs. Because you can't adjust the levy for operational costs beyond net new construction unless you do a referendum. You can adjust it to debt. So if you take some of the capital, convert it to debt, again, not paying it off over several years, the debt will be outstanding for a few months. So we're seeing this being used more often as communities are seeing some Other questions about that? So now I'm going to turn over to my colleague Tammy, who's going to kind of talk a little bit about investments. Part of what staff had directed to us when we, we're kind of talking about doing this financial management plan for the town, is to look at all of your financial policies and look at, just kind of your overall revenue streams and expenses to kind of see, what opportunities that you may have. And so one of the areas we were talking about was investments. So that can help you from a levy limit management standpoint to the extent that you can increase your investment earnings, that reduces how much you need to levy to pay for your budget. So Tammy is going to kind of talk through some of the items that we've been kind of pre-doing the town side.
Thank you, Greg, and good job on pronouncing your last name earlier. Very close. You can just call me Tammy O. I never get offended. I'm married that name, so no big deal. So as Greg had mentioned, you guys have done a really good job of building up the town budget so that your idle cash has now built up to a point where you're not using it, you don't really need it right now. What do you do with it? Ultimately, as a town, you've done a great job of keeping it above your fund balance policy. In fact, you're pretty much excessively over that policy, which is good and bad. I think as Greg points out, there are some opportunities for you to leverage that excess cash as you start your capital improvement planning, as well as over the next few years, planning ahead for different equipment or capital projects. So with that being said, I came up here actually in March before we had to wear masks. That's really the very last meeting I went to under a normal role. So kind of fun to be back. Now I've got to have a mask that matches my outfit, and it was a good meeting. I felt like it was nice to be back up here and actually from the area. So it's always good to see what's going on development-wise, and certainly to meet Jamie and Amy. And I went through all of your last couple of years' audits. I went through some of your excess cash or statements and really identified you have a few $1 million that sits pretty idle. And what that means is you've got Wisconsin LGIP, which is actually a local government investment pool, and you have some bank money markets. Now, in your investment policy, your objectives are really safety, liquidity, and yield. As a municipal investor, you are restricted to different types of investments that are typically what they call fixed income investments. So what you've been doing is permissible, it fits within your policy, but it hasn't been doing much to garner any additional revenue for you. So really, when I came up here to meet with them, my suggestion was that we start thinking about long-term, your capital improvement plan, thinking about operational expenditures, and if we look at your excess cash, we really could invest that for you with a strategy that maintains the safety of your principal, provides periodic maturity so that you can have liquid funds as needed to meet operational expenses, and of course, the big fun part about investments, earning a little bit of income. We focus on fixed income investments because they provide predictable yield, predictable fixed income. That's helpful in the budgeting process, especially as you start thinking about your CIP plan. Now, the investments that we provide, if we had talked about this in March, the rates would have been different than they are now. They certainly fluctuate throughout the year. So it's hard to get your specific strategy to you until you're ready to move forward. But ultimately, when we started looking at this, to give you an example, the Wisconsin LGIP has actually declined. Last year it was over 2.5%. Now it's at 0.13%. It's a variable rate investment. It is not a bad place for your short-term cash to be, but it's a rough place to hold long-term cash. Now, we partner with brokers nationwide to get you the best price that we can on investments. We also partner with your local banks. So I've never met a local banking partner that isn't willing to work with us, negotiate rates. If you hold funds at your bank, we want to ensure that they are either FDIC insured, they fall under the state guarantee program, or are collateralized. So I won't go into a ton of detail about that right now, but ultimately, as I mentioned, the strategy would be provide safety, reduce any risk to your principal, we talked a little bit about the different ways that we can reduce risk. We want to provide periodic maturities, and we, of course, want to get you some predictable income for your budget. So really, as Greg and I worked through this plan, we identified that there are some opportunities for the town to take advantage of. And we really would love to work with you in helping to further this project and this financial management plan.
So we did, Amy had put together, and I had just passed around what those balances are right now, just so you could have an idea of what we're talking about for money on hand. I did also include in your packet for today the investment policy. If this was something we were interested in doing and continuing the relationship with Ellers, this would go onto the October 15th town board agenda. This is the draft policy. We would enter in our specific information, and then we could start to create those accounts.
And Jeannie, is that the one I had sent to you, or is that the one that you had from before?
This is the one you sent me.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. And really, what you had existing at the town, there's nothing wrong with it, but there have been some statute changes, specifically around CDs. So we wanted to make sure that some of the language was updated for that. And that's one of the services we provide long-term. We really want to make sure that you're compliant with your own policy and with state statutes. So we monitor for those changes. We provide you reporting so that you can have an efficient process. And Jeannie can come to you once a month if you really want to hear about your investments, or once a quarter, a couple times a year. But we really just focus on making it efficient, and the ease of reporting is really a nice advantage for the town. We act as an extension of your team so that some of that burden can be lifted. Do you guys have any questions, or is there any information that you want me to cover?
We'll keep both Greg and Tammy here for, Greg has one more piece that we want to talk about with the TID, but then they'll both be here so we can ask questions.
Okay.
So before I conclude on the TID piece, I just want to kind of summarize really kind of the bulk of what we have talked about up to this point. So again, your working draft for your 2021 budget identifies some fiscal pressures, notably kind of health insurance and increases in some of your solid waste charges. Certainly to the extent that you can keep levying for capital items in your budget as you've done historically, strongly encourage you to do that. But again, that may be a little more challenging under levy limits when you see some increases on the operational side. Consider that capital projects fund that I mentioned, which is a way to kind of separately account for your capital items, so that's not commingled within your operating budget. And any borrowings you would do in the future could run through that fund as well. And then use of some of these levy limit management strategies that we've been talking about. If that gap, kind of persists, either it can be partially managed just through changes in revenues and expenses, but some either that short-term borrowing is probably the next best solution. You can do the referendum. I know those generally aren't too much jumping up and down to do referendums. Certainly appreciate that as well. But again, just want to kind of alert you to kind of some of those trends, because I think it can be managed. I don't want to give the impression that it can't be, but I just want to explain that consideration of some of these techniques could be needed going forward to just continue seeing your levy where you need to be at the operations. So before I just wrap up on some comments on the TIP district, just want to pause, see if there were any questions or
I'm curious, if your service maintain liquidity to generate some more return on this $3 million. We've got an overview, but what kind of strategy or where would the money be invested in to get a little bit better return? If we're making $92 on $3 million,
across the board. It wouldn't matter, you know, if you call any financial advisor right now in the fixed income world, rates are very low. It's good for you if you're issuing debt, bad for you if you're investing in that debt. Really, we focus on permissible investments under state statute, which, as I mentioned before, the Wisconsin LGIP. Prime example, very liquid fund, 0.13 rate, right? So just sitting there, and we do expect it to decline a little bit. So a couple of weeks ago, the Fed announced that they're holding rates at or near 0% for the next few years. What that really means to us is that Treasury rates will be impacted by that. And then, of course, our rates really peg off of Treasury rates. So 1-year Treasury right now is around 10 basis points. You know, it fluctuates each day, but it's 10 to 12 basis points. Fixed income securities outside of that, like agency bonds. Agency bonds are, you hear about Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, things like that. They're basically government-sponsored enterprises. We're still finding yields in that like 50 basis points or so 0.45 to 0.55 on callable agency bonds. And it's low-risk debt that you are investing in. It provides some liquidity as you can build a portfolio based upon maturities that you need, or you can focus on a strategy where you have monthly maturities or quarterly, but ultimately we will guide you through when you need that. If you start thinking about other municipalities, you can invest in other towns, other villages, when they issue debt. And those rates are actually about the same, give or take. Anything beyond 2 to 5 years, the rates go up a little bit, but we are keeping most of our investments right now under 3 years. Certainly there's some opportunity, if we see it, we recommend it, but ultimately rates are pretty low. So nobody get too excited yet. Yeah, certainly we can get you a little bit more than what you're earning in the LGIP, but ultimately rates across the board are pretty low. So good question. And as I said, under permissible statutes, there's a list of investments you can pursue. Fees, municipal bonds, agency bonds, and a few other. Occasionally we'll see loan pools, so we have some options, and those really are where you get a little bit of a yield advantage.
Just 2 more things on that would be, one, we have a lot of money in limited amount of places. So this would help us to diversify that, would be good. And 2, we would have someone that is solely in investments, working for our benefit, where that wouldn't be possible with our staff to have someone that would just be solely working on investments.
And we really are looking to consistently and constantly evaluate your portfolio and make changes as needed. So certainly, as you know, I will tell you what we're telling clients now versus what we told them back in March versus even December. Our strategy has to shift to accommodate market conditions. So that's certainly guidance you can find out on your own, I'm sure, but really when you work with a professional, I do act as an extension of your statement. Any other burning investment questions? I can go on all night. We can talk about them.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm just going to finish by just making some comments on the TIF district. So the expenditure period for the TIF district for Sand Valley, the expenditure period is now elapsed. So what that means is that there are no new projects that can be undertaken within the district. You can continue to make the debt service payments, the town's annual costs associated with managing the TIF district audit and other reporting requirements, those costs continue to be incurred. And then under the development agreement with Sand Valley, they're eligible to be reimbursed the shortfall payments that they've been paying to the town over the past several years. So all those costs can continue to be managed through the TIF district, but any new capital expenses under state law can be incurred after the expenditure period happens. We really we've updated the cash flow projection. We presented this to the Joint Review Board about a month ago to take into account the refinancing that we did this summer, and then projecting some of the debt that we're some of the development within the district that's anticipated to occur. So right now, the district is projected to close 2 years early in 2030. So this is just some of the detail, directly from what's in your packet. So, through, 20, construction year 2019, the fifth year of the TIF district, this just shows kind of the new increment value that has been generated, about 55.6 million of increment value. We're projecting some growth in the increment value due to some, residential construction within the district, other golf course and other amenities within the golf course to generate some additional increment value. So everything that's shown from construction year 2020 going forward is a projection. But everything prior to that is what's actually the increment value that's actually generated. So if all of that comes to fruition over the full life of the TIF district, that would generate about 18.8 million tax revenue into the TIF fund. So last year, for example, the TIF generated about $1,079,000 in tax increment. Next year, that's projected to be about $1,230,000. So healthy increase. So this is just the cash flow projection. It just bears out what I just said, that the district is projected to close by year 2030. So the main revenue stream to the district is the tax increment revenue. There's been some borrowings that have come into the TIF fund as well. There were shortfall payments that were made from 2017 through 2020 by Sand Valley that totaled about $1,380,000. And, we show the debt service payments and the past debt, the refinance debt, and just some of the ongoing costs associated with the TIF district. The repayment to Sand Valley over the next several years, that about $1.4 million shortfall. Taking all that into account, the projected new value, again, showing that the district could close about 2 years early, which is pretty significant. I had the pleasure of being involved in this from the get-go. When we created this district, there was no expectations of ever closure. So the fact that 5 years later, it's projected to close 2 years early, so it's a significant success. Well, that kind of leads to just really kind of the final item I wanted to talk about, just to kind of give you an example of what the impact would be when the TIF district closes. So when the TIF district closes, all of the increment value that's generated will go back onto the tax rolls. It will benefit the town, the schools, the county, the technical college. So that increment value as of 1/1/2020 is at roughly 55.6 million. Hopefully that will continue to increase. So the year, following the TIF closure has to occur by April 15th of any calendar year. If the levy limit law stays the same, the year following the TIF closure, the town will have a one-time levy limit increase it can claim on its worksheet. You can only claim it the year after the TIF closure. You're not required to claim it. Practically, what would likely happen is, we talked about how the town uses an adjustment for debt service. You likely would have to use less of an adjustment for debt, which would be beneficial to you from a levy limit management standpoint. So you would likely claim that levy limit adjustment. If you're still claiming adjustment for debt, it's more advantageous to claim the TIF adjustment in the year you're eligible for it. So that does happen under the current levy limit law the year after the TIF closes. So we're going to look at an example of what happens if the TIF were to close by April 15th of next year. It's not. But let's just, for discussion's sake, it was. So we're going to calculate how the town's maximum allowable levy would change based on that one-time adjustment. If that maximum allowable levy was levied, how would that impact the tax rate using the 2022 budget projection as an example, and the current increment value of 55.6 million. So what that means is, again, this is just an illustration. So your maximum allowable levy would increase by about $105,122. So then your allowable levy will go to about $3,328,000, which is an estimate for illustration purposes. So if the town total allowable levy for the 22 budget is approved, the equalized tax rates for the town portion of the 2022 budget would be about $4.08 per thousand. So by comparison, for your 2020 budget, your equalized tax rate for the town portion of the tax bill is $4.65 per thousand. So in 2020, a $185,000 home paid about $860 in town taxes. If the TID closed, your levy still increased up to the maximum allowable by law. The town taxes on that same $185,000 home would decrease to $756 a year. So even though your allowable levy goes up, all that increment value coming on pushes the tax rate down, where, just in this example, a $185,000 home, for just the town portion of taxes, the taxes would be about $100 less, maybe. So, I'll guarantee you this will all change between now and 2030. But this kind of illustrates, the benefit of the closure of the TIF district. Again, all that value comes on. You're going to see, all the taxing jurisdictions are going to benefit. I just put this in the context of the town. So
That's ongoing too, though, right?
once all that increment value comes back onto the tax rolls, it stays there.
The increment is not going, but the adjustment is the 1 year.
That's true. Yeah, I took it as the values there. So yes, the value returns to the tax rolls, and that's where it stays. But yeah, the one-time adjustment. So if the TID closes in 2030, and the levy limit law doesn't change between now and then, you'll have that one-time allowable increase for the 2031 budget. I just kind of backed everything up and kind of used some numbers more in real time. So kind of where we go from here, realize this is a lot to kind of absorb. You're going to continue kind of working through your 2021 budget. So as that process kind of continues, we'll get updates from staff, and we'll likely revise the model to include your final 2021 budget. Make any other changes, they either come from the board or staff or both, to the operating projections, the capital projections, and then update the model, and then kind of prepare a final written report that kind of encompasses all this information we were talking about. So that's kind of where we go from here. So kind of see this process probably wrapping up early next year. So any questions, comments, guys about this?
As Greg said, it's a lot of information to take in. There are 3 questions that I'd like us to discuss today. One would be talking about that capital, and if we wanted to see that separated within the budget. One would be the investment policy, and if that interests us, to put that investment policy on a future agenda and start that relationship with Ellers. And the last would be, how would we feel about the short-term borrowing? At this point, like Greg said, we have approximately $170,000 gap, depending on some different capital investments that we would do next year. Because if we would decide to proceed and do a short-term borrow, that's going to change some of the budgets that I distributed today. Because obviously, police and highway have capital. Police, highway, and fire are usually the places where you experience the most capital investment. And while we have Greg and Tammy here, it's a good opportunity then to talk through those 3 items.
Why would we borrow money when we've got $3 million and one of those basically account for $170,000 basically 1.9%?
You could certainly look at maybe using some of your general fund balance to kind of supplement your capital levy to maybe pay cash for some of those particular items. I think it's just trying to do that in a very, prudent manner, so we don't draw that fund balance down too low. You're you're above your policy, but, that's also one of your biggest fiscal strengths, as noted by Moody's. So, while they know the policy, they see you're historically above the policy, so that's kind of the benchmark that they set. So you can certainly look at trying to apply some of that cash consistently going forward, to maybe see that fund balance number come down a little bit, but I don't know that that's going to completely solve the problem, but that's definitely something we can take.
It's not part of that 100 million increase in cash.
I think under this short-term borrowing, that impact is, because again, I think the only thing we were showing being financed long-term with fire trucks. One was 700,000, one was a little less than that. That's significant items. I think the other items we're talking about, again, it's would you normally levy or use cash to pay for those items? Yes. But under levy limits, that's where the gap is coming in. So you're converting it to debt, but it's debt you may pay off in about 9 years. So
Yes, but it also increases the tax.
somewhat. In the example I gave, it was increasing it by $2,400. I mean, that was the added expense of doing that short-term loan.
But then you'd spread that $2,400 across the whole tax piece, that's not
Correct.
one tax.
Yeah, that's the increase in expense.
So yes, it is added to that, that end levy or mill rate, but we could,
But to a homeowner, it's more than the effect of starting $2,400. You're also increasing the amount of taxes that you can take on them.
Using this example, so if you had, again, squad car, plow truck, and a vehicle, and it added $385,000, under how you're handling it now, you're levying that $385,000. You're going to, if you did a short-term borrowing, you're still levying for that $385,000. That's already, it's going to be part of your total levy, instead of being part of the levy that goes towards capital, it's going to be part of the levy that goes towards debt. So you shifted $385,000 from capital to $385 for debt. The only thing additional that you're levying is that, in this example, is $2,400. So that's the only additional amount that you're adding to the levy. Because the $385,000 is in your budget already as a capital item in the operating budget that falls under that net new construction cap. We're saying instead of leaving it in capital, you're going to fund it through debt. So the principal amount is the same, $385,000. It's staying in your total levy. It's just instead of being part of your general and capital levy, it's part of your debt levy. The only thing additional you're levying is $2,400. So that's really the only additional cost that's being applied to the tax. Again, I mean, ideally, you would just levy the $385,000. If you have that levy limit gap, unless you cut the operational budget or increase your non-levy revenue sources, this is a way to still fund that $385,000 and get with as minimal as additional costs as you can and still be compliant with other
So whatever the need the cost, we're short $170,000, we're kicking the can down the road. And you can do that, you can do that, and you can do that. It does catch up with you at some point, if you keep doing it. Am I interpreting that right?
I mean, you can do these short-term borrowings each year if you have that levy limit cap. I mean, again, you're borrowing it, you're getting the cash, and then what you're turning around, you're paying it right off. So you do the short-term borrowing before you adopt your budget. So say you did it in November of this year, the debt obligation is outstanding. By next February, it's paid off on this loan.
And think of it in another way, so we do a short-term borrow and we buy a plow truck that replaces a plow truck that's costing us significant to maintain because it's older and it needs more work. That plow truck is likely gonna last us 15 years and it's gonna need less maintenance in the first 5 to 7 years that we own it. So we are replacing equipment that would otherwise cost us more and that we would need to repair more and would still need to replace at a later point in time. Because this would only be used for those capital items.
I firmly believe that any capital investment that has a 10-year life should be financed, unless you've got gasoline from not drawing any interest, you need to get it. Otherwise, we should be financing those investments that have long life. Think about it.
But on the other hand, if you can extend the life of the capital outlay beyond 10 years, now that finance, other, you save the money.
And we're good at that here.
And again, I just want to reiterate, we're discussing this because of levy limits, not because it's, your current financial practices, there's anything wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just under levy limits, it's getting harder to do that. You're not alone. A lot of communities are starting to struggle to keep those, to pay cash and everything. In this example, you're financing it for 90 days, and that's close to cash. Yeah.
Unfortunately, in the past, we've taken money away from road maintenance so that we can buy PCU, but that's wrong. Road maintenance is very important to keep, talk about, something out of hand on the road. If you don't do road maintenance, that's what's going to happen.
And we've talked, I think every supervisor at one meeting in this past year has talked about the importance of road maintenance and wanting to keep that road maintenance budget.
So again, I mean, you're still levying for the acquisition cost, just like you are now. It's just there might be just some interest expense added on to it, but it's it's not, again, you're not going from paying cash to paying it off over 10 years, you're paying it off in 9 years.
I think that's very noble move to cover your beat, because it's under the.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is.
Yeah, it's entirely a levy limit strategy.
$2,400 is put on tax over, how we can get that to.
This is a fortunate time. The interest rates are so low too.
Right.
You wouldn't do this if interest rates were so high. But if,
And this
this
is
is a limit, levy.
Right.
Great, if you can, for operational expenses, plus you can go ahead and apply your capital life.
right, and you can
Great, every year.
And you can evaluate this every year. I mean, just because you do this once doesn't mean you're going to need to do it the next year. If you have significant net reconstruction, that increases your allowable levy, then maybe you can go down to levying cash for it like you were now. So, I mean, it isn't necessarily something you have to do on an annual basis, but it's the tools always available to you. In my opinion, this is the biggest unintended consequence of levy limits, is that it makes it harder to pay cash for things that you could afford. So, I mean, again, I don't want to say that I think this is a good idea from a financial standpoint. You could levy and pay cash for it, that's exactly what you should do from a levy limit standpoint. This just becomes hard. And so this gets as close to that as possible.
If the board is in consensus that, on the short-term borrowing for the next meeting, we would pull those items out that could be short-term borrow for next year. And then we could reflect for you what potentially that would mean moving that to a capital instead of in the regular general budget.
I agree with you.
We're not going to be able to make a decision unless we see it separated like that. Does anybody know why capital improvements for part of general obligation.
Why the capital was just an individual budget.
Right.
I think that's just the way that it's been done, and I think in some aspects, it's, you know, just being able to see, you know, your capital piece. If we went to a capital, accounting line, it would be capital, our capital program, and then it would say police, fire, cemetery, public works. So it still would be divided under there, it just would come out of their budgets and put it into that budget. But still divided in by department.
I'm here with that also.
And I just think doing a capital equipment budget or whatever we want to live with, it gives everybody greater visibility as to what those capital improvements are, even though there's subcategories under that overall category. If you look at your general obligation funds right now, yes, it's identified, and I understand, but I look at it, and I've never owned a business, but I'm a business person. I have to set aside money to make my capital improvements. So am I setting up a capital improvement fund, or am I just keeping it inside my operating costs that I'm just aware of? Generally believe that, you know, businesses are set up to have capital improvement funds, separate from their operating budget.
It'd be a lot easier for the public to see what we're investing in capital improvement, and not have it all screwed up.
It also would be easier, we take that carry forward, right? So if it's unspent in a budget, then we have to account for that carry forward for capital separate, that we've designated those funds. So keeping it in a separate budget would also be much easier on an accounting aspect. I still have some department heads in the room too, I don't know if they want to chime in at all, but.
I think we have a consensus.
Okay. So, capital budget, we're gonna look at numbers for the short-term borrowing, what we would pull out, what we would short-term borrow. And investment policy, how are we feeling on that?
I think we have to keep moving forward on it, and if we're not making a decision now, we still have time to peruse it, learn more, ask more questions, and then if we're all comfortable moving forward.
So again, the draft policy was in the packet. Again, this one is generic. We will add in our pieces, you know, so it states town of Rome. And we'll add this back onto a regular town board meeting for further conversation. On the 15th, yeah.
Good idea. There's a lot of merit.
I think for today, because we're at 90 minutes, I did give you some budgets, but given our conversation, those are likely going to change a little bit. So I believe I gave you IT, police, and highway for today. Those you could disregard because they're going to get changed. And then we'll kind of circle back to those at our next budget meeting.
Could we ask a question, Brad, a budget question?
Sure.
I appreciate looking at your three-year plan going forward, dealing with road issues, as we look to the future. My question is, what projects do you anticipate completing up this fall? Can you identify, I assume there's 2 or 3 that we're going to be doing, and what streets are they and where are they?
Yep, actually, American Asphalt was here last Thursday, and they paved Castle Court and Apache Lane off of 16th Avenue. The path over there. They also did a little wedge for us on North Walden Way. That was done. We did some gas mastic, which is a joint repair on Night Shield Way. That's also done. So the one project we did not get done this year was the, done by the Lure Bar. American Asphalt ran out of everything that we had scheduled was done, and will be done then. Yeah.
Thank you.
So talking about Archer Lane, is there an opportunity to do that earlier in the year versus later in the year?
Yeah, he's had to be first.
I'm gonna propose to, American Asphalt is in the middle of switching over who's their local rep that we deal with. I'm gonna propose to this guy, and then also again to the new guy who comes up, I would like it done by June 1st. If everyone thinks is that a decent date, or by, I don't know when Memorial Day is, but as long as it's done by the holiday, I think that's, is that kind of what you're thinking too?
Definitely before Memorial.
Okay, yeah.
The other thing I'd like to see done next year, I don't think it's a paving issue necessarily, but on the south side of Apache, east of 13, where the water comes over the road, we can fill that in and put some grass in there to keep that embankment that we would create intact. Maybe prevent the water from coming along there. Look, I'm not sure if those are anything.
Yeah, we kind of do have some right-of-way limitations there, as far as how far we can go, and with it being borderline wetland now, how much work you can do in a wetland. But we actually just had a hydrologist come in maybe a month and a half ago, and I asked him the question, I said, if we go back to normal rainfall events, not these right now, we're a pretty high one the last couple of years, I said, how long would it take for that water to drop back to normal? He said, about a year. Now,
And that happened, I hope it goes.
but I think the point is, I don't know how much we want to invest in something that might be gone on its own in less than a year. You know, these are just ways
Well,
in
we've got a
how,
lot of fill over the landfill at the transfer station right now, right?
no. We don't have a lot, so we're actually trying to get Phil to fill in the hole.
Well, that's mulch at least, right?
Yeah, but that really wouldn't be good, Phil put out on the roadside, because it'd be soft, and if you look,
Our right of way extends beyond the asphalt on the side of the road into that area, 15 feet or 20 feet.
yeah.
So we could fill in that portion of that's ours.
Wetland now, that'd be in our,
Yeah, that's,
wetland.
Okay. I just think it needs to be addressed somehow.
Well, we need to get water out of there, going south like it's supposed to be.
There hasn't been any activity on that.
Well, I guess because DNR, the major chief, the county, we can't do much on gate, wetland. If we did a gate and a hole, we can get the water in the dead where we won't have it.
But in the meantime, it seems to me a lot to be addressed to the extent.
I would just note, it's a, on the 5-year plan that Brad, put together, it's on the back side too. So the first 3 years are on the front and then 24 and 25 are on the back. Next year, Brad did an estimate for what those costs would be for those road improvements. The years after that, there aren't costs, because those might change depending on what we get accomplished next year, or if something else would occur and would need to get moved up. But I think that the board has asked for the last couple of years for a 5-year road plan, so having this is very nice.
And it says for years, we need to put 500,000, minimum 500,000 road maintenance every year. We're gonna do, we're gonna take a hand on it.
one thing to look at with that, if I can, just for 1 second, we have roughly 140 miles, I think, of paved roads, 150 total miles. If we just keep doing 2 to 3 miles a year, these roads aren't gonna get touched for 50-some years. A road is not gonna last that long. We have enough roads here already that were built in the late 70s, when the lot development was done, that they're all coming at the same point and need to have repairs. It's gonna snowball fast.
You're gonna pay me now, you're gonna pay me later.
Now, most of those roads weren't built to, our current standards. There was gravel on sand, double oil on them, the tire on, and then eventually they paved. There's no base on some of the roads, but 3 or 4 inches of gravel.
The costs to do the repairs now are going to be, if we want to do it right, are going to be pretty expensive.
All the sinkhole was needed because they buried stumps underneath the paved, put the road right over.
Yeah.
Brad, when you say to do it right, what are you looking at cost per line?
Cost per mile, 150 to 180,000.
That's paid.
to pay. And that's with bringing in, just quick, 3 to 4 inches of road base on top of what we have right now, have it pulverized, we go into the base, we blend it in, which gives you more road base that you need, so there is no road base there right now, and then we can pave over the top of that. And then we get back onto more of a crack fill, chip seal schedule.
Sorry, I asked the question. Conversation.
No, it's good, because you can point out the plan.
That's good, we need plans.
Okay, item 7 is getting pushed off to the next meeting. Item 8, next meeting date and time, October 15th at 3 o'clock. We'll be back in here for continued work on the budget right before the town board meeting. Anything else?
No.
Anybody?
If questions come up after you continue to look at anything from Ellers or our conversations today, please reach out and let us know.
Anybody have